Hi. Thanks you all for coming to my talk. It's really exciting, especially because this is a tech talk meetup, and I'm here to not talk to you about technology at all. So this should be really exciting for all of you. My talk is Stop Making Excuses, Start Delivering Value. Methods for immediate product-centric delivery. Today's agenda, what we'll be covering: an introduction, which we're in the midst of, story time, what I mean by lean product design, so I'll be covering exactly what it is by my definition, and some others. Culture first, why I'm arguing that we should focus on culture as opposed to other methods of implementation of a lean product. And then I'm going to give you the playbook for doing it. And then after that, you can leave. So let's get started. Who are you? Why should I listen to you? It's a reasonable skeptic. Many of you out there, I hope you are, all you Type A developers. Well, I'm Jordan Cortland Brown. My pronouns are he, him, his. I've worked 6 years in nonprofit strategy prior to joining ThoughtWorks, where I've been 2.5, almost 3 years now. And primarily my work has been focused in lean product transformation, so Giuseppe totally did steal my entire intro. There's not much more to say other than that. I don't want to dig deep into credentializing myself. If you want to, you can look me up or talk to me afterwards. But I want to get into the meat of what we're doing here. I'm going to start with a parable. There's this unicorn I know. And by unicorn, I mean a company with over $1 billion in valuation now. They were founded in 2012, 5 years ago, and it took them 5 years to get to $1 billion. It's pretty quick. And they're growing fast within a growth industry. And beyond that, they're moving into product adjacencies. That's good, because what happens in a lot of these tech-focused disruptive startups that, while they may not be tech fully, their entire product is driven by technology, bigger fish wait out this process. Startups will come in, identify an interesting niche or solution to a problem that's out there, spend a lot of time and money growing, research and development, scaling themselves, and then somebody like Amazon, Google, Walmart, Nike will come in and say, great, thank you for all the free research and development you've done, we're going to steal your business model and do it at scale. So the challenge to organizations like this is not only to make that initial difficult thing happen, which is getting to here, but after you've gotten to here, everybody's going to come in and try and eat your lunch. Everybody saw Amazon go out and buy, a grocery store business. Now, Kroger's on there going, oh shoot, what do we do? Everyone, no matter if you've gotten to this really exceptional position, is always a little bit at risk to the big fish that are out there. So, why am I talking about this unicorn? Well, they have a specific way of doing things. And some of this might sound familiar to some of you. There's a problem or an opportunity space they're exploring. They take that problem, they define a broad solution to it, they break it down into some amount of specifications. They run it through delivery, and then they run it all the way out into release. And there's some amount of value that happens after all that build, test, release over and over and over. This is familiar, it's agile software development, great. Now the problem is, they took that original idea, they broke it out into specs, and through this 3, 6, 9 month process of running it out to release, hitting the market and getting some amount of determinate value, this never changed. The thing they started with 9 months ago is a spec document, features, epics, stories. They listed them all out and ran them all through, with some amount of degrees of deviation as they discovered some things, but fundamentally this was probably the same solution they came up with 9 months ago. So that means what value they got was unknowable in the beginning, as it always is. But as they continued iteratively releasing, there was still no new knowability about the capability of the value and the impact they were going to have based on the investment they were making. And so this was always an assumption up front, and it was an assumption until it hit the market. They're a billion-dollar business now, and people are going to be watching, and big players are going to come in and start playing. And they might play this same way, but they get to play this same way with much more than $1 billion in their pocket. So we're talking about inertia and scale. So how do we combat this? How do we continue to be innovative? Whether you're this billion-dollar unicorn, whether you're a legacy company trying to reassert yourself in a new tech-driven market, how do we make sure that we're delivering new innovative value consistently? So why should you care about this? Well, obviously for the reasons I just mentioned, but also in a much more condensed version, so you have confidence that you're investing in the right things. All the things your team are doing every day, all day, the investment of each individual person's time and effort is an investment. It's money that you could have been spending on something else, but you're choosing to spend on this. How do you know you're spending it in the right way? I made a picture of what the model of a good organization looks like, and it's very simple. To be truly effective at consistently delivering value, a product organization's capabilities should be represented like this. Agile at core. And when I say agile, some of you might not be super familiar or need a fun refresher. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Be flexible, be responsive, prize people more than paper. These are things that fundamentally created a shift in the way that we do software. That was good. We want those things at the core because they do inform these other two things that are really important about a modern tech at core organization. Continuous delivery. This has grown, people are using it, but let's really quickly define it. Continuous delivery is the what and the how of what we're delivering. It's our capability to take some sort of idea, build it, support it, sustain it in production as it's released to the market. Great. It's the method by which we deliver product value. Whereas lean product is the why. Why did we go through all this effort to build it, test it, and release it? Well, obviously there was some sort of value we were hoping to get. But lean product is fundamentally about getting to that with much more nuance and much more knowability. So for the sake of clarity, as some or all these methodologies might be new, unfamiliar, vague to the room, differing opinions on what they mean, I'm going to give you my definition. Simply, starting with CD. It's your ability to build, test, and release working product. But even more, to build that product quickly and efficiently, to test it for continuous validation, and release it with confidence and security that when it goes into prod, you're not starting a fire, that it's working. You can be comfortable that every time you push the button, you're safe. And as much as possible throughout this entire process, which is a cycle that you do over and over and over, as often each one of these things as you possibly can, this is all automated. Anything that is currently manual that does not have to be, make it automated. And do this over and over and over, refining your process. There's lots of tools, there's lots of ways people are doing this. It's interpreted different for what type of product you have. Shout out to GoCD. But this is fundamentally what CD is trying to get you towards. Now, the problem you run into is not that CD in and of itself isn't good. It's great, it's fantastic, you absolutely need to have it. But what if you just have the what and the how without a really good understanding of how to do the why? I'm going to give us a hypothetical. We are all today, now in this room, a company. Let's say that we're in the business of satisfying the hunger of customers, and we know they are budget-conscious millennials. Is that a familiar statement? They're not, though. All that friggin' avocado toast. It's ridiculous. I have like 7 houses by now. They want something cheap, hot, and fast to eat. That could be lots of things. What are some of those things? Pizza, cheap, hot, fast. Burrito. Okay, but here's the problem. In this hypothetical situation, we're cut off. This is all the time we've allotted to design research, and no more. And actually, what's happened is, some hippo, what we call the highest paid person in the room, somewhere else, has said, the marketing team's done the research, we've done all the segmentation, we've done a ton of analysis, and we truly think the best thing to have for fast, hot, and cheap is Skyline Chili. Why do you laugh? What's wrong with Skyline Chili?
Everything.
Everything. That's the exact right answer. Everything is wrong with Skyline Chili. Those of you unfamiliar, Skyline Chili is spaghetti noodles with chili on top of it and then shredded cheese, and they dare to call this a meal. So we've decided we have a robust, mature, complex, continuous delivery pipeline, and we're going to run Skyline Chili through. Boom! Look at all that Skyline Chili. We did it. We made it. Congratulations. Everyone's full. inherently, everyone recognizes the next worst step, which is this. You'll notice familiar faces up there. Some of them are our customers, some of them are our board of directors, some of them are the media, who are gleeful about this situation. BuzzFeed is having a field day. But we were able to very quickly, with very low error rate, deliver tons of Skyline chili, which is a nightmare food only fit for like enhanced interrogation techniques. So like, great, we have a CD pipeline. We can deliver quickly and consistently and with predictability, but why does that matter? Like, what do we have it for? Unless we have a purpose behind it. And this is pretty reductive, I get it. Like, everyone out there, I assume, at your offices, on your teams right now, is working on something that somebody believes that there's a purpose behind. But my question is, how do you know? Truly, 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 how do you know? Because everybody believes they have the good thing. Everybody believes they're working on the right thing. Everybody's making concessions and conciliations to different people in politics within the organization, and the market demands this, and our competitors are doing that, but how do we know that we're doing the right thing for us, for our product?
We don't know.
We don't know. So how could we know? And that's what I'm proposing, is that there's a method for that. And that's exactly true, and I recognize that feeling, is that we're here and we're just kind of throwing darts. So, what's the first step for this? If I want to talk about lean product, first I've got to talk about design thinking. Design thinking is the practice of innovating for necessity and desirability within the realistic realm of the possible. So, what does that mean? Good design is the practice of creating something within constraints. Because there's, if I had $1 million in a million days, I could do anything. But that's never the case, and we're always living within current context. So, what do people really need and want? How do we discover that? There are many ways, but find that out. What is technically and organizationally feasible, and what is capable based on our finances and resources? That's where we innovate with them. Now, this is simplified, but doing these three activities would set you off immediately in a good direction. There's a discussion about how much money and time we're willing to spend. There's a discussion about what truly our current capabilities are in terms of platform and people. And then there's an understanding of what the market and the customer need is. What do we put in the middle of that? That's the next part. What do we do to define that? But in a way that's low risk, low waste. And that's lean product. We want to be able to build the right things and build them in the right way. You start by understanding this customer need, meeting them where they are, talking to them, seeing what decisions they make, asking them about why they made those decisions. And you imagine a solution to the opportunities you discover in that phase, and you say, I bet if we, and you design some alternatives. They're living with the current situation, what could the future look like? And you do it in the lowest rent way possible. Something that you could very quickly put in front of them and say, this was your problem, what do you think of this? You run it through some amount of testing, bring it back to see what the results of that testing was, and given the results of what you've learned, you say, some of this stuff can be refined, some of this stuff was great off the bat, some of this was garbage and we should never talk about it again. Great, we've saved ourselves some time. Yeah, what's up?
I'm curious what you mean by test, because that's kind of the...
Yeah. So, and I'm going to go in depth as to what this means in different ways, but absolutely, in the context of a prototype, it could be something as lightweight on a napkin. A test would mean me putting in front of you and asking you questions. Given I have some sort of conditions and concerns, I'm going to measure that against. It could also mean I've built an amount of software, small as possible, put it into production, and I see what the metric results are. So this scales to any type of activity you're currently doing on your work. I want to talk about what this looks like in practice. And to do that, I want to talk about the world's best chance for a corporate hegemony. We're going to talk about Facebook. This was Facebook in 2011, reorganizing Taylor Cox, Badros, Schopfer, and Lesson. Big names, everybody knows them. Luminaries. They're out there at Facebook in 2011 getting shifted around. Engineering, mobile, advertising. Things are happening internally, and TechCrunch is on the case. Flash forward to 2017, there's a story in Ad Weekly talking about how Facebook now makes 84% of its profit from mobile. Why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because in 2011, Facebook made no money off of mobile ads. $0 was made. They had no offerings for the ability to you, as an advertiser, to publish ads through mobile. They reorganized that group of people and said, let's figure this out. By the end of 2012, they'd made $390 million off of mobile ads in their first year of operation. By 2015, $1.8 billion within that year, and it was now considered 84% of their entire advertising revenue. So they went from 83% of their entire company making revenue off of advertising, but all of the desktop. By 2015, mobile had completely overtaken that. They had shifted their entire market face in the course of 4 years. That's incredible. How do they do this? I argue, and in fact, there's a great book out there by Antonio Garcia Marquez called Chaos Monkeys, which actually kind of goes into some of the salacious, kind of gross bits of Facebook culture, but also lots of really interesting stuff about their product culture and how they adopted lean principles to try and run experiments through. And I can't tell you exactly what their organizational strategy looked like at the time. They wouldn't give it to me for this presentation. Shocking, I know. But I can surmise, based on the principles I know about the way that lean product works. So let's start with their vision. People use Facebook to stay connected with friends and family, to discover what's going on in the world, and to share and express what matters to them. That's their destination as an organization. And you know, with a company with the ambition like Facebook, when they say people use Facebook, they mean every human being breathing on the planet. That's what Facebook means. That's their ambition. So that's their overall goal, is there's a world in which all you do all the time is Facebook to be connected with other people. Face-to-face communication be damned. So, but we want to grow sustainably. We want to meet them wherever they are all the time. And we have other strategic goals too. But in the course of this case study, we're talking about their mobile transformation, right? So what does the organization need to achieve to realize this vision? Well, wherever, whenever. I can't take my desktop computer all over the place with me. My laptop's pretty mobile, but fundamentally we're getting down to fun and other wearables. So wherever, whenever, meet the user. And then growth and sustainability. We need to make a ton of money if we're going to have scale enough to cover every human being on Earth. What's our strategy for achieving that goal? Well, we have an existing advertising platform, but something kind of needs to be done with it. We have existing mobile capabilities, apps, mobile web, but those two aren't connected. We have a desktop experience, but who's ever going to use that anymore? So our metrics need to start to shift, right? We need to say, not just we're making money, not just we have users on mobile or desktop, but also we're growing mobile users. That's what's going to sustain advertising dollars. That's how you sell to advertisers, is impact and reach. And then advertisers are interested in using this platform, and then we give them new beneficial offerings, mobile. So how do we connect these two here? What are we doing next that delivers this value? Well, we need mobile ads. We need to start bringing these two together. And we need a unified user experience. We're going to meet them wherever they are. The experience on desktop, on mobile web, on any platform they're using Facebook on needs to feel consistent. And that includes advertising. So just because we institute an advertising platform doesn't mean we can sacrifice the quality and the existence of the user experience. You may quibble, being current Facebook users, as to how quality that experience has gotten with all these fun new mobile ads. I know I do. But you cannot deny how much money they're making out of it. So, we need to do something about this. But this is an outcome. That's okay. We've put this up here. It's a North Star. Now what we need to do is determine, what are we investing our money on? How are we organizing ourselves and our capabilities around this problem of creating mobile advertising as a platform for making money? Well, all of these things are hypotheses. They're called pod teams, you can call them product teams, whatever you'd like. But fundamentally, they're groups of people organized a hypothesis that says, I bet if some sort of solution. And guaranteed over that first year, there were massive amounts of people split into very discrete groups who were running down very quickly very specific hypotheses with very specific metrics. They were saying, in this course of time, we're willing to invest 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these 6 people, this amount of time, this amount of dollars, and we're going to test this hypothesis. There's conditions to it, and at the end of it, we're going to say, either it went really great, so we're going to double down on it and bring the rest of this whole roll around onto making this scale up. It did okay, there were some ups, there were some downs, so maybe we need to pivot towards those ups and avoid those downs, great. Or we kill it. We take this group outright and we split them up amongst the rest of the people. There's other hypotheses we have to test. That's how you go from 0 revenue in mobile ads to 300 million in mobile ads in the course of a year. Now, yes, of course, Facebook has the skill to do this in a way that very few companies do, but fundamentally, they got to an organization that was undoubtedly structured with engineering divisions separated, with mobile separated from desktop. They got to a place where they had a unified experience that allowed them to serve ads from any platform to any platform. That's pretty incredible within a year. And just by the fact that they have scale almost makes it more difficult. It's harder to turn a bigger ship. So how do you do that? With all these things together. You have to streamline and optimize your ability to deliver value with continuous delivery. It's absolutely imperative. But also you have to have directional intent. If you're going to make bets, you have to understand why you're making them, what you hope to get out of them, when you're going to stop making them, and how often you're going to do that. What's your capability? What's your willingness to take risk? I argue that product centricity is a culture of design. And I say that I know that lean product itself is a set of methodologies, it's an approach, there's practices, techniques, and tools you can use to make it work well. But most importantly, to be able to do product-centric work, you have to think of it in terms of culture. Facebook took, at the time, I think in 2011, they had about 3,500 to 4,000 employees. I was trying to dig around their HR stuff. But in that year, they grew from 3,500 to 4,000 to about 5,500. It's a huge amount of people to organize around an entirely new effort. And that requires buy-in, that requires capability, that requires understanding. There was comprehension growth that happened. There was training that happened. People just didn't do this because they were getting paid great, which I assume Facebook really does, so if anyone's out there, reach out. But they also did it because they felt they could. People had an understanding of what these concepts were, and that doesn't come just from reading a book. I've got plenty of lean product books on my shelf, some of which I've read, some of which look at me in shame when I'm doing like other things, but I know these tools and techniques, but not my whole team. They rarely do. Everyone here is focused on specializing in things that maximize their value in the labor market. So if you're a developer, why would you spend a ton of time learning about product practices when really you'd focus on progressive web apps or whatever, VR? Like, these are the things that feel like they're differentiating you within this market. Why would you focus on product? And I argue that any organization you go to that's trying to be truly successful and innovative wants this culture. So what does it look like? Well, when I talk about culture, by this I mean a group or an organization, their values, their behaviors, their norms, their communication, their politics, and their organization. So values, cross-cutting across every single thing that they do. These things are principal to them, they hold them to be true, they believe them. They may not always practice them, they're always stated and unstated values, but these things are always true about their activities. Behaviors, the model by which they interact and create. Norms, if you were to observe them for a period of time, patterns would emerge about the decisions they make and how they make them. Those are their norms. Communication, the methods and modes by which they go, here's information, I want information back. Language, song, poetry, other things. Politics and organization, I'm not going to dig too deep into on this one. Politics, obviously, who gets what, where, when, and why, and who gets to decide that. And then organization, how are we structured? How do we sit? near each other? What's our hierarchy? What's our closeness? Those things are important, but because this talk is about giving you some things that you can take home and start doing tomorrow, these things come into play more when you're trying to scale something that's already working broadly within an organization, because these are the big things you're going to run into next. But the first things, anybody can be addressing, from individual level to a team level, all the way up to an executive level. So we're going to cover those things first. Oops. Screw it, it's a fun emoji joke. So, why am I talking about the primacy and the importance of culture as opposed to principles? First of all, I'm going to give you helpful examples of success and pitfalls to avoid in applying principles. Second of all, I want you to avoid taking home a bunch of checkboxes, of practices, of workshop outlines that you could do, but until you have an understanding and a comfort with the principles behind, the values behind, the norms behind product centricity, they would be cargo culting. Does anybody know what that means? What's cargo culting?
That's when you follow something that you follow something that's a tradition that you don't understand.
Yeah, it comes from because now everyone's on the mic. You follow something, it's a tradition that you don't understand. It comes from World War II when a bunch of US airmen were island hopping towards Japan. We kept setting up runways on these tiny little islands where, fortuitously or not, indigenous people who had never run into Western culture before suddenly met airplanes and cargo drops and ships. And with the airmen and the planes came food and interesting stuff. And then when we pulled out at the end of World War II, and people came back, anthropologists, sociologists, to study these tribes, they found that these people were standing at the end of the runways waving in planes that never came. Because that's what happened when food came. Somebody would stand at the end of the runway and a plane would come. And it was because they weren't invested or brought into an understanding of the system by which a plane would reach this island and bring materials. All they understood was that when someone waves, a plane lands. So they were fundamentally taking a technique that had no connection with the wider purpose of its effectiveness. So I want to avoid giving you something that is a tool you could use, but that it wouldn't give you a connection with the broader principles behind what I'm trying to get across here. So I'm not saying don't start reading, don't start studying, don't start looking at best practices. I'm saying start your evolution by exploring concepts. So, why culture? Principles are open-ended questions with many possible answers. Techniques are terminal questions with yes or no answers. And you could take any of these questions, and you could look at your team and you could say, I could figure out an answer to this, we may not like it, but we could also figure out an answer for what the future would look like, and it would be good. Whereas, if I say, given any specific practice or technique, do we or don't we do it, the inevitable answer is yes or no, and that's the end of the conversation. Because unless somebody on your team is an expert in whatever these best practices are, getting from where you are across the gap of no to best practice is going to be a long, arduous journey, given that no one has affiliation with any of the principles behind it. So, given that this is going to be an evolution, and that you're all going to be on the ground floor, which is really exciting, how can we understand what an evolution feels like, what it looks like in an organization, and why it takes the time, and why I'm offering a method of doing it that's grassroots as opposed to top to bottom? Because we come to organizations all the time, and while leadership buy-in is great, at many clients I go to, the biggest struggle is the day-to-day. It's the people on the ground, the line-level teams, who are the obstacle. And it's because there's an aversion to the risk, there's aversion to the change. So how does an evolution look that gets us over that? I'm going to use the example of Facebook again. Back in 2011, when they're transforming their mobile ad capability. Pretend we've got the advertising team and the mobile team, both of whom exist already, but are being asked by their leadership to do a massive transformation, which requires much more interaction than they've ever had, probably starting from 0 to 100. And so what does that look like? How do we start? So we have this truncated process. Let's pretend we've got mobile here and advertising here. We have a truncated process that inhibits our ability to work holistically within the overall vision that's been given to us. Okay, where do we go from here? Well, we identify areas that's worth starting. Small, short-term gains that we can make using the principles of lean product. Let's start talking about solutions. Let's start talking about understanding the market. Let's start talking about understanding the customer. And then let's make some very small, very limited positive changes. Great. Now we're beginning to blend areas of the business around a product strategy. Once we've gotten the lay of the land, we have an understanding of the things in front of us, we can start saying, oh, well, you're starting to see a lot more of product happening between advertising and mobile. Whereas before they were sitting in different parts of the building and they were talking about different things, now all of a sudden they're starting to look blended. And then in the long term, we have become an organization designed for purpose, delivering value, understood and owned by all. All of a sudden, this transformation that started here starts taking best practices and sharing them out during lunch and learns and things over there. Other parts of the business are reorganizing themselves at the same time, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. And this is over a very long term, though, and that's okay. So how do we start? How do we kick this off? Well, I argue that there's a very simple playbook that we can use. I'm going to go over it today. How do I know where to start specifically, though, within this playbook? Well, you need to provide something of value, which hopefully your organization currently does. You offer something to the market. It looks like a product, a service, a generalized offering. It's specific to whatever it is that you do. And then beneath that, you have capabilities to provide that value. You've organized your organization, not you, but maybe someone there, has organized it in some way that within these bounded contexts, all of these added up together equal our ability to consistently deliver this product to the market. At least sustain that, hopefully innovate it. So that looks familiar in terms of that setup because that's basically the lean value tree that we talked about earlier. When I talk about a vision and a strategic goal, that's the value you provide. When I talk about strategic bets, promises of value, and then the individual hypotheses we're testing, those are the capability to provide that value. So where in that, if you were to take this model and you were to think about your organization, whether you're an executive and you sit up at the top or you're someone at the bottom, I would urge you to think about mapping this from the bottom up, is to say, who are all the people doing things at the individual level right now? What teams do they sit on? Why do they sit on those teams? What are they consistently working on, even if it's multiple things? And draw that up. Draw bigger and bigger boxes until you get up to, we overall provide this. And that gives you some idea of a rough sketch of a lean product value tree. Great. So now you ask yourself, where's the pain or the opportunity? Because the best value you're going to get from lean product is somewhere where there is already like a desire for change, especially if you're going to institute a cultural shift. So not in terms like, this thing sucks, we hate it, it's, this thing sucks because, and we're not accomplishing this outcome, whatever that outcome is. Where is the unrealized, obstructed outcome? Does it sit across an entire vertical slice of the business? Is there an entire area where it's always going wrong? Is there an absence? Is there a discrete vacuum right now that everyone is currently aware that, man, we are just not doing anything around this, and we absolutely should? These are the types of things that you would take to a group and say, I propose that we organize around this and figure something out. So if you're responsible for something individually on a team, think about the team that you're on right now. Whether it's program level, team level, or executive level, if you're hearing a member of your team, what are the outcomes that delivered scope should realize? Like, what are the things that you're working on that someone's expecting of you, or the group that you have? Do you even know what the value of that is? If you do, fantastic, you can write that up there. But if you don't, this is a great way to start interrogating that and say, well, what are we doing? So, anybody have the examples right now of a team that's doing something that is kind of an open-ended question? Feel free to say no if you don't want to shame your own company. Dog workers? Anonymized? That's okay, I'll give an example. No, go ahead.
I was saying the individual tasks that we're working on are as like an organization.
I think like where you sit with a group of people.
Oh, well, I'm an engineer at a small startup, and everyone else has like a specialty that isn't engineering. So some people from service backgrounds, other people that are getting into DevOps, and they're like integrating things like CodeShip. And after evaluating me, it's like, we would like you to come in the product. So this is an open-ended thing that I'm doing,
Okay.
and that I wanted more direction on.
So you are in an organization where you're doing one specific thing and someone's asked you to take on this whole new role. Okay, interesting. So that's a big ask, right?
Yeah,
And
along with the engineering. Like, I'm not stopping engineering, I'm doing it along
Awesome.
with engineering.
Great, classic. As a former BA, PM, QA, I get that. So we've got some areas of pain, and this is an example of an opportunity. The reason somebody has to do that, I expect, is because there's a gap in the product capability within the organization. So great, how do we make this work? So someone's identified it, you've identified it, but what if nobody has yet? How do we identify an area of opportunity? And it starts with everyone's favorite activity, which is complaining. It's the best. Over coffee, in a room for 5 hours, which is my favorite method, it's marathon complaining, is get everything up on a wall. Everyone just go, what's the worst? And just put it up there. And then start saying, well, why is this thing the worst? Well, what causes this to be the worst? Somebody may have put up, it's another thing, it's Judy. We put Judy up here. Judy's makes this bad thing happen, and then Steve makes Judy's bad shit happen, and it goes and goes and goes. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, what's the relationship between all the bad stuff that's happening right now, and can we find a baseline, and it's Carl. Carl is the baseline of why all the things go wrong. You try and find the root cause of all of these interrelated problems. Now this is an ecosystem. You're going to go about trying to make a proposal for a solution to the business, so it's fair to say that you can't just pull at one thread and everything will be better. That's okay. What you're trying to say is, can you give us a boundary, ideally encompassing the root cause, that we can say, if we address this stuff, this is stuff that 5, 10 people could get their hands around. Great, let's start there. But how do you convince somebody in your organization to let you do that, to make that investment? Well, that's because not only did you draw down to the root cause, you drew all the way up into business impact. This is a project I did a year and a half ago. They had were using Visual Studios for their project management. Anybody ever use VSTS? How'd you like it? Slick, right? It's great, it's the best. You can see stemming from that, limits CI possibilities, no mature build radiator, time spent configuring visible and functional backlog. All these things had knock-on effects that basically added up to, in conjunction, we were able to deliver less features based on all the other time and all the other investments and all the other challenges we have on this team. And a lot of them kind of hit the center point. If I just go to an executive and I say, I hate VSTS, he'll say, great, get out of my office. But if I go to another executive and I say, I have a very compelling reason as to why you want to get rid of VSTS, because I can tell you exactly how it's impacting your business, she'd say, beautiful, let's talk about it. And how do I do that? This is a really big complex diagram of a ton of things wrong across an entire digital organization. Broad concepts. But how do I take an individual thing and say, let's deal with this? Pick out an area or a chunk that you've categorized of it, and I call this Schrodinger's solution, is when, at any given point, you put this in front of an executive and you say, this is the bad thing, this is the area of opportunity, we'll call it. Both of these timelines are true until you make a decision. So there's a terrible nightmare path, and then there's a really positive path. You spell out, if we dealt with this positively and solutioned good outcomes for it, we see these knock-on effects resulting in these broad business level outcomes. But if we don't deal with this, or if it gets worse somehow, these knock-on effects will happen for these negative business outcomes. Your goal in this activity is to make a choiceless choice for an executive. Somebody who makes 1,000 choices a day that are broad and far-reaching, and they have to happen quickly. So your job is to make that a really easy process for them. Great. Here's the nightmare scenario. Oh great, I don't want that. See how it's colored red? Like, this is great, you want this to happen. Great, but it's not as like pedantic or as, I don't know, infantilizing as that. Truly what you are trying to do is say, we believe, given the outcomes that we're currently observing, that all these people got around and talked about, this is the negativity that we're living, or could live worse if it continues. And this is the positive world we could live in if we just take a little bit of time, and here's our proposal. So great, you've convinced them. You've gotten, I don't know, let's say 4 to 5 months and like a team of 4 people. Or, even further caveat, it's just your team now. And given all the other scope that's on your backlog, you say, can we dial some of this back a little bit and make room for some of this, because we truly believe this is important. I know I went over a scenario that was like, let's spin up a whole new thing. You don't necessarily have to. It can be the thing you're doing right now. So let's get into the playbook of values. We prioritize why before what and how. We prioritize outcomes over outputs. We prioritize boundaries over constraints. We prioritize better over perfect. What do I mean when I define why before what and how? Well, let's pretend we're an e-commerce site and we have low checkout conversion. If we were going to talk about why before what and how, the what and how conversation would be, we need to implement PayPal. People have PayPal. They want to buy things with PayPal. It's like, great, like that could very well be true. But actually, for prioritizing this first, we'd say, do we know what our customers are hoping to accomplish and how's that going in checkout right now? Is PayPal the best solution? It very well could be. Let's go and validate it. Let's have a purpose and intent behind the decision we make, beyond just sort of gut checking our way into a solution. Outcomes before outputs. What did we accomplish this sprint? Our velocity went up. We completed 10 more stores than last week. Great. What if it was all Skyline chili? Then there's 10 more Skyline chilies. We delivered this business value, and our average cart value went up this percent. If we frame our conversations with people in the organization, not around just quantity, not just around output, not just around a report, but around what is the value that our team is dealing with, down to the very granular level. It's really great to talk about an individual story. I love in a weekly report to talk about this very specific story, not in the terms of the bounds of like the story number, the card, and like, what the eight? I think I turned it off.
Turn it back.
As I was saying, not in terms of just the very basic profile information about what your team did this week, to talk about how you made a difference this week. And that's a much more difficult thing to talk about, and it's naturally going to behoove you to have things like metrics available. It's going to say, these are the things the business cares about. What's the way that we, as a team, can start talking to those things that the business cares about? They may not be in place now, but having that capability means we're able to make much more moves and shaking when we're like, hey, we want money for this, or we want time to do this. You've proven that you're doing something valuable to business over and over and over, week by week. People recognize that. Boundaries over constraints. Are we working effectively? Well, if we're talking about constraints, someone will tell you all stories need to be written in Jira in this format by this date with these drop downs. That's fine. I've got nothing against standardization. It's a lie, I hate it, but mostly I hate Jira. But a better way of looking at this is, if you're an executive or if you're a program level lead, and it's not absolutely necessary for X to be true about a team, if it's just something that people do, and that's just habit, let's say everybody uses Jira, and we're not actually after a bunch of standardization, as long as we can get like cycle time, velocity of our teams. Why do they have to use Jira? What about, we have both physical and digital backlog, and devs understand the stories, and our cycle time is low. That's the only thing that the team has to own out of this. Maybe they happen to use Jira, great. But maybe they don't, and as long as you're getting this, that's beautiful. If you give people a container by which they can behave and let them run with it, very rarely do they ever just fall on their faces, and if they do, it's probably for other reasons that have been affecting them. People want to own an outcome, they want to own it well. So give them boundaries, not constraints. And then better before perfect. Will we validate this with real users? Somebody might say, we can't do user testing because the staging environment we don't have external access to yet. We haven't set up like a login thing, we have to create credentials. Somebody who's focusing on better before perfect would say, marketing got us in contact with 5 people, we got their phone numbers, legal said it was cool, we're going to talk to them, and we're going to sit down with them, maybe even over Skype, like we don't have to get them in the office. Great, we can do some user testing. There's always an obstacle, and there's always a solution. Try and find a solution, even if it's ugly and dirty today, because getting in the habit of just doing it for the sake of the value it gives you, as opposed to just avoiding it because you can't get the best thing, is a much better habit to get into. So what about behaviors? How do we act? I'm going to give you a model of how anything on a team, from the long-term cycle to the very narrow thing that happened today, can be dealt with. Well, first we discover. We research customer needs. We run them through some sort of ideation. We say, we have a question, or we have an assumption, and we want to go talk to people to see if we're right, or what's missing in their lives. And specific to our product, we're talking about this e-commerce site, people don't seem to be finding the thing that they want on search, or on filtering, whatever. Let's go talk to them about it. So we go and we research customer needs, and then we come back with a bunch of areas of concern. They're broad, some are smaller, some are niche, some are cross-cutting, some are very vertical. But fine, there's a bunch of opportunity that's out there. Let's prioritize it. And this is where you make a demand of the business to say, what do we care about? Because the only way you can prioritize something is if you have a rubric to fit it. Right? You have to say, these are the things that matter most to us. And it could be right now, conversion needs to go up, or cart size is a really big focus of us. That may be where the business is at right now. It's up to many people to say that's best approach or the worst approach. But right now, the business is giving you a rubric that's useful to work with. Great. So we can prioritize which of these areas of interest we want to start attacking. Then we come up with multiple alternatives as to how we can attack those areas of opportunity. Run them through the lightest way prototyping possible. Put them in front of people. Put them in front of the market as much as we can. Get response to them. And then measure that response. We have some sort of control within that. We're comparing it to the current state. We're also comparing it to a specific set of rubric and specific set of questions that we know we're trying to ask. We're getting at something. We're interrogating a thing. So if we're trying to get people to find products better through our e-commerce search, there's a specific set of things that matter in the course of searching on e-commerce. What are those controls? And how are we measuring whether or not a person's getting better at finding a product? There are some metrics that are better than others to talk about that. You'll discover those. And then you'll measure their prototypes, how they do against each other. Then you'll say, of the ideas that we came out with the prototypes, these were probably the best. Let's figure out a way to refine these designs that we've come up with, and then scale them. We take the narrowest possible set of end-to-end value and run it over and over and over. And when I say run it over and over and over, it's not just here. You've got the narrow MVP. Great. Now you keep doing this over and over and over. You don't run this over and over. You keep asking questions, you keep challenging your assumptions, you keep validating what you believe to be true to make sure it's true. And you do it in little bits, so it's much easier to do over time. You do it week to week. But also, it's not just an entire product you can run this process through. And in fact, the best way to start getting a handle on it isn't trying to apply it to every single thing your team's doing it. Some of the best ways to apply it is to apply it to a specific feature. Try this out. Your retros. How good are they? They giving you a lot of value? No? Yes? Well, who knows? Like, what's the measurement of what a good retro output looks like? What would it be like if we got a lot of value from a retrospective? Define it as a team. Run a bunch of different formats through. Make yourself a better retro. Or get rid of retros if it turns out that they're the worst thing actually for the way that you as a group work. Fantastic, but prove it. None of these things are particularly large, but the point here is that all these behaviors, this model of design, which is what it is, it's a model of design, it's a model of creating something collaboratively as a group, given a set of constraints. All these things can be made better by it. So, yes, of course it can apply broadly to Facebook needs a new advertising platform. But the way to start getting culturally acquainted with it, and these principles, is to pick something on your team, on your day. Laundry detergent. Which one's best for our family? Try it out. And the more you become acquainted with thinking discretely in terms of the concepts of the design process, as opposed to just accepting that these steps that we've been taking robotically every day are the way that we do things, the more you'll be acquainted with trying to scrutinize something for the value that it's providing you, as opposed to just saying, we're delivering something, we have an output. And again, these are all cycles within a broader cycle. So in the course of delivering the product, whatever it is that you're working on, the service, you're running that through. This process is happening in a big way, just as much as every single day what you're doing as a team is actually happening in a much smaller feedback group. Challenge yourself to figure out, how are we doing this? Where is it most useful to do? Sometimes this process is even too heavyweight for some decisions. But I'd wager that there aren't too many decisions that a team makes that can't fundamentally happen through this, even though this could happen in the course of a 30-minute conversation. There's small metrics that you can make. There's small constraints you can give. There's a small amount of control that you can give to a decision, no matter how small it is on a team, that you could run this entire thing through on a whiteboard to talk about test coverage. That's totally feasible. But the question is, are you having outcome-driven conversations in your team, and what's a model for you to be able to do that? Norms. Nothing is absolute, everything is negotiable. What do I mean by that? This is a hypothesis-driven model. That means everything's up for debate. That could get exhausting. You should create boundaries about when we're having debates, so it's not in the middle of lunch or something, that like maybe just people want to have lunch and chill. But there's a space for everyone. There's a container and a boundary within the team that says, what are we challenging today? What are we trying to make better? What are we challenging this week, this month, this year about ourselves? And nothing gets to just have a free ride. Everything's capable of becoming different. Everyone's a product owner, everyone's a designer. Who tests the product? Like when it's out, when it's in development. Is it only users? Is it only UX? Is it only someone from usertesting.com? I'd wager that it's super important that all of you do. I'd wager it's super important that when someone's testing with a user, you may not go every time, but you go sometimes. You understand the way that the users are interacting with your product, even if you're not a designer, even if you're not a UX person, and especially if you're a developer. It's just the thing we always forget about developers, is that you're not engineers. You are, we'd agree say so, I'm sorry. But you're designers. You do the same thing that a sculptor does. You have a process, you have a framework, you have a model, decisions are made that result in an end product. That's fundamentally what design is a broad human concept. And so you're making those decisions. Why would we want to understand how those decisions are affecting the people that you are giving the value to? Get as close to that as possible. Have you sketched something? Have you ever sketched an idea of the product you're working on for a new feature? Have you sketched out a new flow? Not everybody has to consider themselves an artist, but you are a designer, whether or not anyone's allowed you to be or not. Take control of that. Design with the user. As much as is reasonably possible, continuously be designing with the user. If you don't have a relationship with users right now, you can't get one on the phone, you don't have a pilot group, start figuring out what's the distance between your team, your product, and the people it's meant to affect. How can you close that distance? Start with the simplest possible solution now, but as you go, try as much as you can to bring them closer to your process of decision making. You might start out when you're bringing them into the process of decision making that it's sentiment analysis or marketing data in the room. Fine, we got them closer than they were last time when we had none of that data in the room. But imagine a future state when you have a close relationship that's trust between you and a core set of users who you talk to once every few weeks or once every week. And they're on a call with the team, and people know their name, and they know yours. And that's a lot of value you get from that as a sustained relationship. And that will affect the quality of your product. Measure everything. Are retros useful?
What was it for the acronym?
Oh, that's when I didn't have space to say, as much as is reasonably possible, I think. I'm trying to fit it into the space of the slide. Because just gonna, after this thing is done, I'm gonna email this out to you so you can all have the playbook. You can start playing around with it at work or live. As much as is reasonable, yeah. Measure everything. How are we dealing with tech debt? This is one of my favorite ones on the team. As someone who's very often played the role of PM, how well are we doing with tech debt? Do we ever know how good we're doing with tech debt? That's a pretty common thing on the team, is that we've got a wall where people put stickies about like stuff in the code base that no one likes, and then it like starts to get dusty, someone moves it, and it never gets dealt with. So what are we doing about tech debt? I'd wager it could always be better. And how do we measure what better looks like with tech debt? It could just be output to start with. We've dealt with more tech debt than we did last week. But I'd like it to possibly, in the future, get more outcome focused. What is bad tech debt and how do we know? What's severe tech debt versus low risk tech debt? There's ways to categorize this stuff across the entirety of the way that a team operates and behaves, not just on the product. Autonomous versus accountable. We own the outcome. And by that I mean we own the why. And as much as is reasonably possible, the what and how of this is given to us. It's sort of that conversation about boundaries versus constraints. We're given a boundary to play within, and as much as possible, people leave us to make decisions within that. But there's a caveat. If we're going to be owners, if we're going to be product owners of the team and we're going to own a product, that means we are accountable for the choices. They're made intentionally, they're backed by reason, they're logged somewhere, they're transparent, that means people can find them, and when we make them, we've told people we've made them. And as much as possible, we share those decisions outwards if they're valuable to share. None of this happens in a vacuum. If we're going to be product owners truly, we have to behave like people who own the thing. So that's the only caveat. All the rest of it just go on and run wild. Lastly, communication. Who communicates? You are a team, or you're an individual at the center of a team. You should absolutely be communicating with your team, I hope so. But also, there's an amount of communication you have to have with the organization and the user. How do you do that now? How don't you do that now? Are there reasons why you have certain types of communication with these people or not, besides the value you're getting? Are you avoiding conversations with these people? How often are you talking and what are you talking about? Trying to be understanding what the value of the interactions you're having amongst these three different groups. And then talk about the method. I'd argue that there's a pretty simple slope to the efficacy of communication, and it's email's the level worst. But there's reasons why. When you email someone, you're effectively giving them a task, and it's asynchronous, and it's just like going, here, deal with this, and let me know when you're done with it. You walk away. There's a usefulness for email. In fact, I find the most potent use for it is like good documentation. I love being able to search by email like after we had a meeting, we logged, all these decisions were made, everybody who needed to be on the CC got it, and I can very quickly run back through all the emails and all the decisions. But beyond that, if you're talking to your team a lot with email, I'd start questioning that. Above that is phone. Chat goes a little bit beyond above phone because you might share code snippets. You can collaborate even sometimes depending on what Slack sort of plugins you've got operating. And then above that, telepresence, but most importantly, face-to-face. I challenge as much as possible, you want to be climbing that with each of these. That's not to say have more meetings. Don't do that. Have less meetings. Don't have too few though. But the goal is that every single interaction, every single communication you have across this is intentional. And as much as possible, it's the highest efficacy of communication you can have based on the needs of the conversation. Now, to know that, that means starting to interrogate the conversations you're having with these people. I mean, if you're like coming up to someone's desk and like goofing up around Game of Thrones, like don't let me get in your way. I don't know, email is your preferred method, do it. But when you're talking about the outcomes, when you're talking about the product, when you're talking about the way that you work, think about these three groups and how often and why are you having conversations and in what way with them. So that's the playbook. Open to questions.
Quick question about the how.
Yeah.
Where would you put the use of stickies and things like that on the how of communication?
That's a good question. I think that how would you put stickies on the communications? How? I think stickies, depending on how they got there. If it's you putting stickies on the wall on your own, like that's somewhere outside of this range.
Is there a way of communicating with the team?
Yes, I think as much as possible. If you're putting a sticky up, I find that it's coming from an activity, right, or a workshop or a conversation. The most I'm using whiteboards and stickies is when a group is having a conversation and we're trying to represent information in a way that people can pick up and move and understand and feel tactile with. I think like that's why the tech debt wall becomes like an issue sometimes, is when somebody it just becomes this passive sort of graveyard for ideas, oftentimes. If a radiator is useful, it'll stay on the wall and people will use it. If it starts getting dusty, they won't. So the question I think would be, in terms of the effectiveness matrix here, I'd say use stickies and use them as a way to communicate, but start taking sort of like a loose metric on how often are people using this method, how often are people going to read the stickies, to say how effective is this as a form of communication. Interrogate whether or not the stickies that you're using could be done in another way, or are they truly the best way to be doing it.
You look at this thing about presenting like value to like maybe like some higher up. How can you present the value of process to a team that prides itself on not having process and moving fast and just doing shit instead of being held up in
We
the
just
why?
do shit. Yeah, I love
Like,
that.
I'm not saying like it's blind, but like sometimes with me, I'll be given a task and I'll take too long on it, but it's because I know nothing about this task. I want to research it a little bit, actually like get some background before I like have a say instead of just I like this. And like if I wanted to bring this up to my team, like as the youngest, person on the team and the newest person on the team, I can see how it'd be like, we don't do that, like,
Oh, just the we don't. Yeah, and that's you often hear that a lot, and especially as a consultant, we'll be the new people in the room all the time. So we'll go to a company and there's, they have their own culture, and it's like, oh, this is just the way things are done.
I was gonna say, I just worry that when you just do something and it fails or it succeeds, if you have no way of analyzing like why it failed or why it succeeded, then it's just another crapshoot. And
Exactly. And so let me see if I got the question right. You're new onto a team, and there's ways that things are being done, and is there a sense that some of these things could be done better or different, but when sort of challenge people like, oh, this is just the way we do things.
Yeah.
So there's a few ways to go about this, depending on the relationship you have to maintain with these people. I'm distant. One of my favorite methods for instance, the VSTUS one, one of my favorite things I did is we had a big whiteboard for the team, and I know what I bill the client hourly, and I could assume the other PM and BA on the team, and then I would count how many extraneous hours or minutes of time we were spending on dealing with VSTS BS. And then I would just track it just like on the wall every day. I was like, that was another hour, that was another 2, and I would update and just multiply that by my hourly rate. This is how much you're paying me to like move cards around in a stupid way in this thing, as opposed to just letting me do a much more effective thing. So part of it is just like figure out, the client there cared about money. So I spoke to them in the language of money. I think it's useful to figure out what's the rubric and the metric that matters to these people on your team. Like if they truly think it's the most effective way, why? It'll come down to, oh, this is the best because. And then you'll be able to say, okay, let's see if that's true. Over a period of time, be able to say, listen, I just noticed that this isn't the best because. And you can be able to use their metric that matters to them and say, actually by trying this other thing, I've been able to increase this thing that you care more about. Does that help?
Yeah. Thanks.
Of course. I also have my email in here in case you're like shy.
Good question.
Yeah.
What if if communication between the team and organization is broken, how would you fix it?
How would you fix the broken communication between the team and the organization? Oh man, you came here with like some hardballs. We're a fundamentally broken organization. I think it's like, actually that mapping actually would be great. Like, how is it broken? In what way? Like, it's ineffective. It's to sit down together and say, why are we ineffective? Like, what does it feel like we're not getting the decisions made come down our side? We're not able to be as effective as we can be as a team because of things imposed on us. What are the ways that the relationship between your team and your organization is broken? And also, like, one of the biggest things and why I focus on culture in this talk is that it boils down to people. Like, one of the most effective things you can do as a group of people is like invite them to a social event. If there's somebody specifically who's a problem at the organization, who's really causing a problem for your team, like, get them out to a thing. Have them come join your group, and like purely for no other reason than to have exposure and humanize each other. Like, that's always a first step for me, is like, let's take this out of the context that we're adversarial to start with. And then on top of that, there's friction for a reason. There's motivation on one end, there's motivation on your end as to why, and these things aren't lining up. Where's that gap? Where can you identify the place that your rubber isn't meeting their rubber, and vice versa? And then if you can put a name to that, if you can put a face to that area and say, this is the reason why we're not getting along, then you can start talking about how we can change it, right? Like, once it has a shape, then you can start dealing with that shape. Could be really, really bad. It might be a long-term thing. You said fundamentally broken, so that could be a really big hill to climb. Any recruiters here? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, like, try and put a shape to what does broken mean. Broken has some sort of outcomes for your team. It's broken and it results in this. And when it looks broken, these are the tendencies it has. And if you could put a shape around that and say, we can deal with some of these things, we can solution for those areas of breakage.
There's a crack in everything, that's how I like it.
There's a what?
There's a crack in everything.
Thing, and that's what I like.
Like it.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it. Somebody else? Yeah.
In terms of approach, you are approaching to a new customer specifically. What are the values and the practices that you will try to encourage in the customer, so you can create principles from the first line of your interaction with the customer, so that principles get a base in the negotiation and the back and forward for the next requirements or every step moving on the negotiation between your projects. So what are going to be the values and the practices that you must be focused to create specific principles between you and your customer?
So it's sort of like a shared language between you? So the question was, when you go and you're speaking to a new customer,
Yeah.
there's a set of values and principles that you're bringing to the table that you're trying to get them to buy into?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you create those?
Yes. Because, like she was explaining, like you were explaining, the customers has their own way when they get to a specific point, and you have your specific new ways and new technologies and working with Jira and PS, and you have your way. So how do you get to the point where you can interact with your values and your practices, so you can create principles with your customers?
So the question is, like, how do they have their own principles and practices already? You're bringing yours to the table.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key is, I think it's okay to bring principles to the table. I think it's not okay to come into somebody's house and be like, you're just doing this wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't ever just walk into somebody's space and be like, you're the worst. Because it's not true. Like, there's always a reason the thing got to the way it was. No matter how bad it is, there's a history behind every single thing that's there. And even more so, like, the thing I realized, especially with consulting, is that once you start like getting the trust formed with people and you start understanding the history behind these things, is that they're just as unhappy with it too, a lot of time, if it's not working. If you're coming in and you're like, this thing truly isn't effective, they feel the same way a lot of the time. But they're defensive because it's almost like you bring like a friend over to your house and like it's not as clean as you want it to be, like the rudest thing to do if you go to a friend's house is like, man, you're a filthy pig. Like you would never say that because they know, like I forgot to clean before they were coming over. Like there's a sense of shame that comes into that. And so I think the first thing to do is like build a trusting relationship. Like what are the things you do agree on? Where are your areas of overlap currently? And they probably brought you there for a reason. There's principles that you're bringing to the table that they can totally sign on to. And the ones that are divergent, I think the thing is, like the Jira example, I'm not coming in and saying, I do hate Jira, but like, I'm not coming in and saying I can't use Jira, or you must use Mingle, which is some of my concerns with, but like, I'm not coming in with that. I'm coming in saying, I just want to be able to, there's certain things I want to be able to do when I'm doing product management. I want to be able to get these metrics easily. Like, I want to get my cycle time, I want to get my throughput, I want to get my cumulative flow, I want to get those things. If your tool can do it, great. If it can't, then let's have a conversation. I'm not here to tell you this tool's wrong and this tool's right. I'm here to tell you I'm trying to fulfill a principle, I'm trying to fulfill an outcome, and let's work with the things that you have in place and figure it out. Because that's always, and that's a really interesting thing to learn as a consultant too, is that like, I'm going places all the time, they all have different setup. Has anyone ever used version 1? That one's a thrill a minute. And like, it's wild, all this stuff is out there, and I've made all of them work. The thing is like, it never looked the same as when I got there, when I made it work. But I would, you had this concession, okay, I'll use version 1 because that's what you use. Just so you know, I have this idea of if I do this and this and this, I think version 1 could work better for this team what we're trying to do. I'm not here to tell you that version 1 is the wrong thing. I'm here to tell you that like, I'm trying to accomplish these things. Do we think we can concede on that? Do those things, and then I'm trying to accomplish these things, do they sound valuable to you? So it's bringing your principles in, making sure that people understand the value of the principles you're in, but don't come in with like, you shouldn't also be coming in like rigid. You shouldn't be coming in with like, these are the best ways things work. Because like, if you're closed off to ever learning anything from another group of people, like you've immediately failed coming into the door.
Thank you.
I'm curious, when do firms bring you in? Like for example, you don't have to try all these things, grassroots, not getting anywhere. When do they say, and what kind of problems do they ask for help with? Is it along the lines of what you outlined here, or there are other things?
So when they bring us in and when the grassroots things aren't working, they've been trying, they're like, come in, help us transform this. What do they typically bring us in for?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, well, just going through my, 2 clients ago, it was, we want to try a brand new greenfield product. We've never done it in this way before. And we don't fully have a handle on all these practices and techniques. Could you come in with a group of your people, do it with a group of our people, and we'll do it together? Great, absolutely. Then after that, they were like, that was really successful. We built a really cool MVP of a sales tool for a mortgage company, and then we were like, what about a really big transformation of our entire sales organization towards these principles? And Natalie could speak better to that, how that went. But like, they'll bring us in to talk about like, they wanted the cost of an individual mortgage and how much it cost to manufacture a mortgage to go down. Like, and that is really broad reaching. That touches a lot of different parts of the organization because like, from the person at the front desk, or the person who takes the call, to the people on the sales line, to all the tools and technology that it takes to get through the process of sealing a loan, there's all these steps along the way that add up to the cost of what that loan is. And so if you're trying to, they wanted to take it down to a certain thing. And that means interrogating the organization at a really broad level. And so some things are, as small as you have 48 days to build a new sales tool, greenfield for us. Some things are as broad as change fundamentally the way that we think about doing sales. And I think it boils down to what people, we didn't get the second conversation before having the first one. People wanted proof that this stuff works. And that's why I gave you principles to take home from this. I wanted to give you something that's like a container, that like it's a question that you can answer on your own. You can get familiar with asking these questions of yourself, interrogating your stuff, and then solutioning in small ways to see that, oh, when I'm intentional about this, things do get better. And then when they bring us in for a 48-day project to build something that's a little bit better than what they had, they're like, oh, this was really great. Let's talk about doing this in a really broad way. And I think that's the thing is, they bring us in when they want us to prove something, and then after we've proved something, they want us to deliver something more.
Can I ask a question? Who is it that usually brings you
Who is it usually brings us
in?
in?
Is it the CIO, for example?
Can be, it'll be executives across, like, you know, depending on the type of organization they are, it could be the CEO, it could be, our sponsors can sometimes be like somebody in like the tech organization. You know, we're a very tech-focused company. There's a lot of developers at ThoughtWorks, and so they'll come in a lot of times or come to us for our expertise in delivery and being able to create like a delivery culture. And that'll be the CTO. Sometimes it'll be the CIO who's thinking about stuff at like the broad strategic product level. They're like, we want to talk about being strategic and intentional and lean, and so we'll come in and speak to that area. Sometimes they have convergence. If it's like the CEO, they're like, let's do it all. Depends on the situation.
You said to, sorry. Oh, you look that way.
No, well, you last one. Thanks, Dan.
You said to avoid carbon culting that we should start by exploring the concepts. Do you have any recommendations, like if we want to explore these concepts that you taught us about more, like books, podcasts, like blogs, like there's no degree I know in product, like there's no like straightforward, learn more about this, get better at this, think about this differently.
For sure. And there's two I would ask you to start with. The first is called The Shape of Design. And it's funny, when I joined ThoughtWorks, I was trained by this guy, this Australian, like, he was on like this quest for like the most simple, pure book about what design is, regardless of its practice. So it's not software design, it's not painting, it's not furniture building, it was what is design conceptually. And it's a really thin, sort of like 225-page thing that's also kind of like poetic and like really, really beautiful, but also it talks very specifically just about like what is design, what is it as a process, how does it work, how does it matter, and it's one of the best primers to just like thinking like that was one of the best things. Like afterwards, I always feel in my head like the voice I imagined he has as I was reading the book. He's a professor out in Portland, so I imagine it's like super cool. But like I find myself immediately after finishing that book constantly asking myself like, why before what now? Why before what now? I would interrogate, just as I was talking about here, just like really little things about what I was doing, especially at work, about like, how can I think about this intentionally? And then after that one, that's tough. I'd say the one that was another good, super introductory one was Lean UX. I think that's a really good sort of end-to-end about like, what is Lean user experience? And when we talk about user experience, we're talking about value for the customer, which I think a lot of us should be prioritizing. Lean enterprise and then service design thinking, a bunch of other books are great, but like, I think Lean UX is a great introduction to just like, what is this on the ground as a process and as like a method? So the first two ones to reach for would be those for me. Cool, thank you all so much for coming.